Hi guys and welcome back. I'm Adam Thomas, thank you all so much for being here. Today we're going to go through doing stencils, specifically hand stencils. Normally I do my stencils using Procreate on the iPad, which I find gives me a really accurate stencil. Today we're going to just do a hand stencil. By that I mean we're going to print out the design, put on top of a carbon sheet, and we're just going to trace it through and just make a nice stencil. It's a great way to understand what you're doing with the stencil, and plus if anything happened to my iPad, it's always good to have those skills without relying solely on the iPad. So first thing that we're going to do, open up Procreate. The design that I'm going to be using is the one that we did on a previous video. I'll put a link up at the top. This is just a simple portrait rose combo. We're going to just print this out, send it to my printer, see what the levels look like. They're normally pretty good. Sometimes if they're a little bit too dark, all you want to do is just bump the brightness up just by 10-20%. It'll look a little bit overexposed on the iPad, but once it prints out, it's just going to give you those few little extra details just to make your life that little bit easier doing the hand stencil. So I'll just send this to the printer. I'll go and grab that, and then we'll start doing the stencil. So this is the printout. So you might recognize that from the other video. Printout's looking pretty good. It has, you can see all the nice little strands in there. The middle of the rose isn't too blown out. The only thing is the eye's a little bit dark, but we can deal with that. So we'll ditch the iPad. We are done with that. So stencil paper that I use Spirit thermal copying paper. Like I say, normally I print my designs out. After I've done the stencil, I then put it straight through the thermal copier, and that does my stencil for me. You can get carbon sheets that are specifically for doing hand stencils. What I find with those is because they have a lot of carbon on them, I find that they tend to be a little bit too heavy on the stencil, which for me, once you start applying that to the skin, if you've got slightly too much stencil solution, it's just going to bleed and you're just going to be left with a big purple mess. For me, the thermal paper has always been the right amount of carbon transfer, and I just get really good stencils. So I'm going to be using this cutting board, which is going to give me a nice solid base. So when I do stencils, if I have to work off something soft like a bed, it's going to give you a real solid base. It's going to give you a nice accurate stencil. So the thermal paper, if you are using this, it comes with a few different sheets. So the top sheet we can ditch. So if you put this through a thermal copier, this is the sheet of paper the stencil's going to be on, which is what you're going to apply to the skin. But we can ditch that. The brown one's just a protection sheet. So this is there to stop any carbon coming off the carbon sheet onto the stencil sheet, so you don't get any little bits you don't want. So we can ditch that as well. The other two remaining sheets, so we've got the plastic sheet, which is covered in carbon, and then we've got the yellow backing sheet. We're going to leave the backing sheet on. It's going to give us a little bit of cushioning, which is going to give us a nicer, smoother line once we start getting the stencil on there. And also it's just going to hold the carbon sheet a little bit stronger, stop it from sliding around and creasing. So design wise, we're going to want the design on the top, because we're going to be drawing straight onto that, which is going to give us this nice blank sheet at the back for all the carbon to transfer onto. We're just going to lay that over the top. It doesn't matter where that sits, as long as when you're drawing on it, you're hitting a section that's got some carbon on it. A lot of people tend to tape it. That's fine if you want to tape it. It doesn't really make a lot of difference. If you move around and reposition it, it's not going to affect your stencil. So yeah, it's not majorly important. The only bonus you get if you do tape it, it isn't going to slide around, and it is going to hold everything together a little bit better. It's just a little bit of extra effort. If you want to do it, happy days. If not, it's not the end of the world. Bear in mind when you're doing a hand stencil is you are going to get a lot of carbon on your hands. So with the few little bits of overlap on the side, just be aware when you're leaning on it that you are going to get carbon on you, and it is a nightmare to get off. What I use to do my stencils, I used to use a mechanical pencil. I now use a biro. The main reason for this is the mechanical pencils, you will be breaking the leads a lot. Now it will give you a much finer, more detailed stencil, just because obviously the pencil nib is a lot finer than what you get from a biro, but obviously with it being finer and the pressure you've got to put on, you are just going to sort of snap that lead quite a bit. Biros, because you've got the rollerball, it is quite nice and smooth. It gives you a real nice sort of solid crisp line on the back of the paper, and you can see clearly where you've been, especially if you're using like a blue or a red. You're going to see that over the top of all the black, so you're not going to miss any bits. Now for me doing a hand stencil, I tend to start from the bottom and work my way up to the top. It's the same way that I tattoo, and it's just the way that I've just got into the habit of doing. So the first bit we've got at the bottom is the rose. So I'm going to start by literally just going around all my edges. So the first bits I'm going to do are these two lens flares at the bottom, which are just two big circles. So with sort of like a medium to hard pressure, you're not trying to force the pen through all the sheets, but then you don't want to be doing a nice light line either. If you just lift up your design, you can see that circle at the bottom. So what you're looking for is just a nice sort of clean, unbroken, solid line. It's not the end of the world if you do have breaks in it, but ideally you just want everything nice and crisp and solid, just so it makes your life easier to read once you get into the tattoo process. So don't be too concerned about how nice of a stencil it looks on top of your design. The most important thing is what's happening underneath. So just make sure you're having a look constantly, just to make sure you're not missed any bits or anything's been a little bit broken, just in case. You can see your biro line gone on nice and solid, but it doesn't necessarily mean underneath that the carbon's transferred onto the A4 sheet perfectly as well. So I'll get this other circle in. These are two of probably the most difficult parts of my stencil to get nice, just a nice clean circle, which again is the downside of doing a hand stencil. Obviously the more times you replicate an image, you're going to be lowering the quality. So from having the design to doing the stencil, you're dropping that down. And then doing the tattoo, potentially you're then dropping it down again. Sort of quality wise, if you do a stencil on the iPad, for example, any circles, straight edges, lines, text, you'll be able to print those straight off and you're not gonna have any sort of downgrading of quality. But the more practice you put into doing a hand stencil, the better the stencil's gonna be, and therefore the better the tattoo's gonna be. So with the rose, the first bit I'm looking at doing is just to get all my edges in. So by edges, I quite literally mean the edges of every petal. I'm just going to be going around sort of each petal individually, just putting a nice sort of solid line in. I'm not majorly worried about accuracy. If I've got little bumps and sort of and wobbles in my line, it's just going to add to the rose. You can get away with it with roses, but obviously once we get into the face, then accuracy is paramount. So once I've done a few lines, just want to turn it over, just make sure that everything's transferring properly, that I'm not missing any bits or any lines are broken. And that way, before I do too much, I'd have the opportunity then to go back and just whip over any lines before I've got a load of lines and I'm not sure which one I've missed or which one needs an extra pass over the top of it. So once we've got all the edges in, so all the outline of the rose, what we want to do is just go in and just get a few more little details. So what I don't want to do is overcomplicate my stencil by having too much going on, because what you're going to find is once you get into the tattoo process, if you've got too much information, one, the stencil has got the potential of just bleeding out and going everywhere and you're just going to get a big purple mess, or you're going to look at it and not know which is an edge, which is a shadow, and you're just going to spend a lot of time going backwards and forwards from your design to your stencil trying to figure out what line's which. So if you try and keep it as simple as possible, it's going to make your life just that little bit easier in the tattoo process and hopefully make your tattoo a little bit better. For me to get all like my shadow reference in, what I do to make it really easy for me to distinguish between the two elements is I'm just going to use like a dotted or a dash line. So that's going to very quickly and easily show me what's like an edge and then what's supposed to be like a shadow reference. So my edges normally are either scratched or grey lined in. Anything that's dotted will be left just so I can shade up to it. And I know that I'm not supposed to be putting any sort of solid edge or solid line into that. So I'm just going to pop a few of these in. I'm mainly looking for anything that's going to be sort of more towards like a dark wash by the time I get into the tattoo process. Or like the big dynamic shadows, anything that's going to just make that rose look that little bit more 3D. If you've seen my roses on Instagram, I tend to tattoo a lot of them you'll see like the trends that I look for in a rose. So these big cast shadows, anything that's got like a really heavy light source. For me, they always just work a lot nicer as a tattoo as opposed to something that's been photographed really, really well. To try and eliminate all those shadows, it'll look nice as a photo, but if you try to then tattoo it, what you're gonna find is just gonna end up looking very flat, and you're gonna have to try and make some stuff up to make that look like a nice tattoo. We're sort of here. So you can see that we've got sort of dotted lines. We've also got some of the solid lines and the very clear distinction between the two. It's going to make our life really easy once we get into the tattoo process. Everything's nice and clear, everything's nice and solid. So for me, that's where I'd want to be with a stencil for a rose. I'm just going to quickly do these leaves. Most of the time when I do roses, my leaves are all drawn on. That's just so I can get the leaves to wrap and to hug exactly where I want them to be, or if I'm working alongside any other previous tattoos, I can get them to work around what's there existing. For this, I am just going to do them on the stencil. For me, it is always best if you can get away with it, doing everything with stencil. This is mainly because once you put the stencil onto the skin using a stencil solution, it is going to stick and stay on there for the duration of the tattoo. If you start using Sharpies or skin surfers, what you're going to find is they do rub off a lot faster than what stencil would. So you're just going to have to be a little bit more concerned about sort of managing that, making sure you're not wiping it, dabbing, which is going to slow you up a little bit. It's going to give you something extra to think about. Whereas if it's a stencil, you can wipe stencils and they're going to stay on for quite a while unless you're really scrubbing the skin. So leaves, these leaves that I've got on the design, they're mainly there just for shape reference. My leaves tend to be the same every time, and like I say, because I draw them on a lot of the time on the stencil, I'm in essence just going to be drawing them but using sort of like the rough sort of shape and outline that I've got. If I do stick them on and I'm not happy with it, then I will sort of just rub them off, and then I'll just draw my own on and just get them to sit exactly where I want them to be. So from the stencil point of view, that is my that's the rose completely done. So I've got my leaves on there, got all my dotted lines, I've got my solid lines. Like I say, everything's got a real clean, obvious sort of purpose. It's very easy to read, and it's going to be nice and solid once we get onto the skin. So moving up into the face, again, in my previous videos, you'll have heard me say that I tend to get like the boring stuff done first. It's going to be the same here now. I'm going to get all the hair done first, just so I've got it all out of the way, and that way I can concentrate then on just getting those little fine details done in like the eyes, nose, mouth. We're going to get a little bit of the structure in first of all though. So a shoulder, just the front of a neck, the jawline, and just basically the outline, the profile of the face. And then we'll get the hair done, and then eyes, nose, mouth. So we're going to start off by just going straight over the top of this shoulder, which on this design is really nice because you've got the really sort of strong cast shadow on the all on the neck. So it's going to give us this really nice crisp line over the top of the shoulder. It's going to get a little bit of like a back, like a shoulder blade in, and then just the back of the neck. And we want this nice solid edge for the front of the face. So the bottom of the jaw, the chin, sort of working up to the cheekbone, and then sort of the dip in the eye socket, and then just over the top of the forehead. So as you can see, it's looking a little bit strange currently, but you can kind of see how we've got sort of this rough sort of face shape working there. And this is just going to allow me just to see exactly where the face is, and to be able to then just get the hair to work just off that a little bit, so I'm not sort of dropping in and putting any lines in that shouldn't be there. So with hair, you're looking for movement. One thing that I've found over the years doing portraits is that sometimes you can do hair and overcomplicate things, in the sense of if you're trying to get every single individual strand of hair in, chances are through healing, a lot of that's either going to blur or disappear. So you're just looking for like strong elements, and then you can add any extra bits in the tattoo, whatever sort of looks right from your eye. So what you're trying to get from the stencil is just like the shape and the movement, and that way you can infill, and then once you get into the tattoo process, you're not just going to have a stupidly overly complicated stencil at this point. Like I say, you're just wanting to get the details, the shape, the composition, so that once you're on the skin and you're stretching and pulling, everything's just going to hold its shape and just keep everything sort of in the right sort of ratios. So at the bottom, I've got these nice sort of like flicks of hair. So what I tend to do with hair is I do sort of like a combination of solid and dotted lines within a line. So if I've got a solid sort of flick of hair, as it comes to the end, I'll then sort of put some little dashed and dotted lines towards the bottom, just so that I know that the line is solid, and then it's just going to feather off and fade into like a nice sort of wispy bit of hair, as opposed to me putting like a big sort of lined bit of hair in that's just going to look very strange and almost sort of cartoony, which is just going to take away from that nice realism piece that you're trying to achieve. So with the stencil, the hair gets pretty dark towards the top. What I don't want to be tempted to do is add in extra sort of strands or extra details into the black that aren't there. I want that nice high contrast with the piece. So for me, it's just important to be sort of true to the reference as opposed to making stuff up. So, you know, if there's no detail in a section, it might look a little bit strange once you then sort of turn it over and have a look at your stencil just to check at what's going on, because you're just going to have what looks like a big open space where you haven't done anything, and it's going to look like you've missed a bit. But once you get into the tattoo, it is all going to make sense. Once you've blacked out that sort of big black block, it's going to almost invert it into what it's supposed to be like, and just make everything work. If it is very sort of hard to read and hard to use, seeing those empty spaces, what I have done in the past, which does sometimes help, I'm not a huge fan of it, but you can sort of like almost cross hatch into those big black areas to show that those areas should be blacked out. Sometimes it can help you sort of just look at it and see that it's all making sense. For me, I just like to have those areas clear, and I just sort of just black them out myself. So even though the hair on this design is a big chunk of the tattoo from a stencil point of view, there's not a lot going on, because there's not a lot of details. A lot of it is just black. We are just looking, like I say, just for that shape and that movement. So I've got 2 more lens flares just at the top here. So I just get these 2 circles in, then we'll just have a little look and see where we're at. So this is currently where we're at. So you can see that sort of in this section and over the top, we've just got a big sort of empty space. Like I say, it can look a little bit strange, but like I say, like a lot of that is just going to be solid black pigment, which is going to give us that nice contrast between the big highlights that we've got in the face and the dark in the hair. What I'm looking for mainly is like these sections, so just the movement, where the hair sort of flicks and overlaps, and then where the edges are. There are a few lines that are on the design that I haven't put on there, and like I say, once I get everything that I've done stencil wise done with the tattoo, I can add any little extra flicks. So now we're at this point, we're going to go back to doing something similar that we did in the rose. So we're going to start doing the features in the face, but we're going to work through it and just get everything that's a solid edge in first. So bridge of the nose, nostrils, the lips, eyes, eyelashes, anything that's very solid feature, and then sort of ignoring any shadows at this point. So we'll get all of those elements in with solid lines, so we've got a nice solid stencil for those, and then all the shadows that are being cast across the face, we're going to do those with dotted lines again, just so we've got that distinction between the 2 line weights, and it's not going to confuse us once we get into the tattoo process. I'm just going to carve out these lips. I don't want to go too overboard in the sense of I'm not looking at doing like a big heavy line around everything. You know, you don't want your stencil to be something it shouldn't be, in the sense of you don't want to be drawing a cartoon. You're just looking for that map, that reference of where light meets dark and where certain elements are in the piece. So that's the nostrils and nose done, and the lips. So with the eyes, I'm looking for anything that is like a heavy element. So the lashes, the top and bottom lids, and then all the details in the eyes, so like the iris, the pupil, etc. And then any sort of creases. So you'll tend to find you'll get some creases at the top of the eye, just at the top of the lid, which is always a nice little detail to add in. So eyebrows, instead of drawing like a big outline on the eyebrow, you want to almost stencil it with the direction of the hair in mind. So for example, I've got the solid edge on the bottom because the hair is sort of aiming and flicking up. I've just put a few little dashes across the top, and that's just going to allow me to see exactly where that's going, just to remind myself that once I get into the tattoo, I don't want to just black those out. I want to make sure that they look like hair and they look like eyebrows. So we'll just jump into this this second eye. Again, same as the hair, because this eye is quite dark, I want to make sure that I'm not adding anything that I can't see. So I don't want to draw an eye, I just want to draw any shapes and elements that are actually in there, as opposed to making stuff up, which is just going to get a little bit weird. So that's all the elements in there that I'd want to work off. So I've got the lips in there, I've got the eyes, I've got the nose placed. So I'm going to look at just getting some of these shadows in. So these again are going to be done with dotted lines as opposed to the solid lines, just so I've got that distinction between the two line weights. Start off with this big cheekbone, which is where the hair is casting a big shadow across the side of the face. The eye socket and going down to the bottom of the eye, and then the sort of like the underside of the eye socket. The big cast on the forehead and the hair. The shadow on the nose is always really important. That will help to lift that nose off the face. And then the shadow sort of underneath the bottom lip and the chin allows the lips just to protrude that little bit. It's going to give you that nice sort of 3D look. The last thing you want is the face to look flat. So accuracy is fairly important. With the dotted lines, it's not too much, because with black and grey you can push and pull stuff a little bit. But yeah, I mean, keeping accuracy at the forefront of your mind, but again, not trying to overly complicate the stencil at the same time. So that's where I'd be looking at getting. So that is all my solid lines in, all my dotted lines, that's all my main features. All I need to do now is just add a little bit of background at the top, a little bit of background around the rose, just so I've got an idea of where I'm going with the background, and then we're pretty much done. So these are going to be fairly straightforward, sort of like a combination of dotted and dashed lines, just nice and quick and simple, just to show exactly where I'm going to go with my background. Again, a lot of the time background is sort of your choice once you get into the tattoo, whatever looks right. If you've got other elements, so other tattoos or any sort of marks on the skin or the body that you're trying to work around, your background is there to be sort of adapted. The main bits that you should be focusing on are your main elements. So this is where I'm at. So this is pretty much all my stencil done. What you want to do at this point doing a hand stencil is, if you just hold that up to a light, you'll be able to see what bits you may have missed, what bits that you might need to add. For me, everywhere that I've got a dotted line, inside of that is a highlight section, so I can see the light coming straight through. It doesn't look like I've missed anything. Everything looks pretty solid. My line weight's nice. I haven't got any broken edges. I haven't obviously missed any sections. So yeah, at this point, I'm fairly happy. This is where I then cut it out, apply it to the skin, and start tattooing. So there you go, guys. That was making a stencil by hand. I am covered in carbon, so I definitely don't miss doing stencils by hand. This stuff is a nightmare to get off. It will come off with hand sanitizer, hence a little bit at the start, or any sort of alcohol-based product. It will help take it off. I mean, doing a hand stencil, you are going to get a nice accurate stencil because you're working straight off the image. So if you work with a reference close by, everything you put onto that stencil is going to be exactly what you see on your reference. So you are going to get a good representation of what you're trying to tattoo. The downsides for me is, one, it is a bit messy, and two, you can get a little bit more accuracy on the iPad, and compared to trying to put an A4 sheet around a body part, if you're using thermal copying paper, because it's almost like tracing paper, once it's a little bit wet with stencil solution, it will bend a little bit better. I'll go through putting a stencil through the printer and through a thermal copier in a later video, but for now, I hope you found something interesting and you've learned a little bit on how to do a hand stencil. It's fairly straightforward. The biggest thing tip wise that I could say is just have a nice distinction between two lines, so dotted lines and solid lines. If you have enjoyed this, make sure to drop me a like, subscribe to my channel if you're not already to see all my latest videos. If there's anything else you want to know about stenciling, be sure to drop it in the comments and I'll try my best to answer any questions. But with all that being said, have a good day and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.